Hola, hola. I'm Zulean Cruz-Diaz, your Texas Rican host, and this is Una Preguntita. Each week, you and I take one big question and break it down to grow in this real and messy life we live in. From engineering to farming in Hawaii to running my own business, I have learned that life does not come with a manual, pero sí con preguntas, with questions. So, tell me, Amigui, have you ever felt like you're thriving in one area of your life but lost in another? Yeah, been there too. Each week, you and I dive into the stuff nobody really teaches us: how to lead, connect, and communicate better, y con tools that you can actually use. Grab tu cafecito, get comfy, and let's figure this out together. Esto es Una Preguntita, where curiosity and understanding lead to action. Vamos! Okay, Amigui. I am so excited for today's episode because I have on a special guest with me.
Hey everyone!
Bienvenida, amiga.
Bienvenida!
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, Abby, before we dive into our conversation, let me set the scene for my amigi listening in, okay?
Okay.
So, amigi, today's guest is someone who knows how to hold space when conversations could be messy or uncomfortable. Abigail Arnold is a staff attorney who's worked across Texas from courtroom house disputes to immigration law, helping individuals rebuild their lives. What makes her stand out isn't just her degrees or her titles. It's the way that she shows up with this steady, thoughtful energy that makes people feel seen. She's the kind of person who asks questions that don't really corner you, but invite you in, who can disagree with you and still make you feel respected. Abby brings curiosity into rooms where most people bring heat, and somehow this superpower of hers changes the dynamics. She reminds me that leading with curiosity doesn't make you soft, it makes you powerful. Abby, welcome to Una Preguntita. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. You make me sound so amazing.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
You are amazing.
So are you. I love this podcast. Very excited to be on the other side. Usually a listener, but now I'm on the other side of the microphone.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So, as we get started every week, Abby, we get started right away with a question, una preguntita. Are you ready for your first question?
I'm ready.
Let's do this. So, Abby, how did you become somebody who leads with curiosity, especially in moments that it could be really easy to just want to shove in and prove your point? Because I think a lot of us, me included, get carried away and think of the goal of the conversation is to be right or to win, because it's a sign of us feeling heard. I think that's the root of it. But you seem to treat conversations more like, almost like a treasure hunt, I would say. And I want to know, how did that happen?
That's a really good question. There are two things that come to my mind, so maybe I'll just go in chronological order in my life. In 2015, I was working at a summer camp, and it was sort of a philosophical worldview type camp. It wasn't really your horseback riding type of camp. Mm-hmm. And so we would go to lectures and have discussions with each other, and we had required reading ahead of time. And something I remember learning at this camp was to hold your ideas out from yourself. So whenever someone's disagreeing with you, they're disagreeing with this idea you've put out in the middle and not with you, the person, necessarily.
Interesting.
And so I think that helped me to, whenever someone said, well, I disagree with you, I would think, well, they're disagreeing with this thing that I have put out in the middle, in between us. They're not attacking me. They're not necessarily saying they disagree with everything I think. But I've put this thing out in the middle, and they're challenging it, and we're having this discussion, but I don't have to take it personally or try to convince them.
That is brilliant. We take the words that we say as part of our identity. And so I think that is where some conflicts can happen, especially when somebody disagrees with you, because you're thinking they disagree with you as an individual, you as a person, versus the actual topic itself.
Yeah, they're disagreeing with my idea, not me. And so that makes it easier to accept their disagreement because it doesn't feel like an attack on me.
Yeah, that is super interesting. So last summer, I was reading a book on rhetoric, and I'll go ahead and link it in the show notes below, Amigui, in case you're listening in and want to read it. And it was talking about how conversation and dialect has shifted. So the author began in the time of essentially the Greek Empire, and how conversations and thoughts and the way that people spoke had a totally different framework than the way we speak now. And so as we have gone through time, we have gotten closer and closer and closer to the words being our identity versus the words being words totally separate from ourselves as individuals.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then I guess my second sort of transformative experience was I spent a summer in China in 2016, and I stayed with the host family, and I just remember having disagreements over East versus Western medicine and Eastern versus Western political systems and other dichotomies or things that come up between East and West. And I had never really been challenged to think that maybe the way I had grown or what I had always believed could be wrong, or other people could also have valid other views of how systems could work. And so I remember getting into these arguments with them and just being so confused because I had never encountered that really, of someone from a completely different worldview or culture. And that summer I really took away with me that it can depend where you're born. It can depend what family you were born into and what ideas were important in that home or in that country. And so I realized I wasn't going to convince my host family that drinking warm water would help with my ailments. Like, neither of us were going to convince each other because we were both staunchly, in our ways. And so that was really when I learned, like, there's no winning here. It's more about curiosity. Like, wow, this is so interesting that they grew up a totally different way than me. They believe their ideas as firmly as I do. And so then it made me just more curious because I realized, well, there's no winning. So how about instead I come from a posture of like curiosity, like, so how did they come up with this different system of government or this different system of medicine or things like that?
I think you just hit the nail on the spot. So essentially you said there was no winning. And so you changed your framework in order to figure out, okay, what can I get from this then? Like, if there's no winning, right? If there's no, I'm the correct when they are wrong, or there's no switching thoughts for the other person, then you're still able to take something away from that conversation. I was going to ask a little bit more, right? Like, I was going to dig in a little bit deeper of, like, when somebody says something that just feels like gut-wrenching, like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah. I know how that feels.
How do you stay curious?
I think that I tend to start thinking about that individual. Like, well, what source of information do they have? Or what sort of background do they have? Or what's their personal experience that might have brought them to this viewpoint? Because maybe if I can understand that better, then we can have a more productive conversation. Or sometimes I just decide I'm just going to listen because there's no winning. I'm not going to convince them. They're not going to convince me, but I'm curious where they're coming from. So instead I'm just going to put my ego aside and try to learn about this person, like seeing them as a person versus just this idea I want to like tackle to the ground.
How interesting. So then before you were saying that in the camp, you had learned to separate your ideas from yourself, right? Those were two different concepts. So if somebody disagreed with your idea, they were disagreeing with the idea, not with you as an individual. But when you're on the flip side and the other person disagrees or has a completely different opinion, you're trying to get the full picture of them, both. So are you actually diving into the individual and not the actual topic?
I think sometimes I think so you're arguing with ideas and they're out here. I'm motioning to like the center. But when you get to a point where it's hard to continue discussing or going back and forth in this center space, so to speak, then I think it's important to go to the person, the source, and see, well, where's this coming from? Where's this all coming from? You know, what's their perspective? What's maybe their lived experience that has something to bear on this idea? Because that may soften my view towards them. Instead of feeling angry, I may be able to learn from them, oh, well, they had this lived experience, and that's maybe why they have this idea they're putting out in the middle. And so I can have more compassion on that idea in the middle, knowing more where it's coming from that person.
Interesting. And I'm going to pause you right here. And I was going to ask you more, but I'm going to pause you right here because I want to bring in my Amigui listening in. If somebody came to mind that you know is trying to actively work to grow themselves and to be better communicators and have deeper conversations, be generous. Send this to them. This is probably a conversation that they want to listen to in order to get the tools they need to grow themselves. And if they grow, they also help you grow. So share this episode with that one individual you're thinking about, because Abby's given some good tools here and I'm loving it. So Abby, this individual I just talked about that we're hoping our Amigui sends this podcast to, they are trying to grow in their conversation skills, in their interpersonal skills, in their just deeper thinking, right? So what do you think they might be getting wrong in conversations that they might just need a little switch, or that they might need to amplify in their mindset in order to have these deeper conversations?
I think that's really important. I think a lot of people may view conversations as a time to win or a time to convince someone of something. And I'm not saying those sorts of conversations are off limits, but I find them to rarely be productive or good in many ways. And so I think that is a pitfall some people have. And I think something that's important is to, instead of saying, well, I think this or I believe this, asking like, well, what do you think about this? Or why do you think that? I think just continuing to ask questions, but making sure that it is out of genuine curiosity, because sometimes you can tell that people are saying, well, why do you think that, in an accusatory way.
Or they're framing a question as an actual statement rather than an actual question.
Yeah. So I think you're wanting to enter into conversations and dialogues of like, what can I gain from this what can I understand or gain from this other person in terms of ideas. There's this idea of like, we all have knowledge, we all have a piece of the truth, and we're trying to put those together to make something bigger and better and grow our understanding and our skills. And so I'm trying to figure out maybe what perspective or piece you might have that I can learn from. And so if you approach a conversation in that way of how can I enrich myself by learning from you, then you approach the conversation in a different way that isn't accusatory or judgmental or just trying to fight, but instead you're trying to learn. But then that person might then be curious about you, and then you can share what you may have learned, and then one of you might actually wind up changing your minds, but it will have been in a non-aggressive way that is more conducive to actually like learning and growing as a person.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts that came up as you were saying that was, one, I was interviewed on a podcast, and I'll link it in the show notes here. And it was just a quick little project manager podcast. And one of the questions that Leomi Lott asked me was, what is one thing managers should really concentrate on and really hone in? What skill is the one thing they need to do? And my instant answer was listen. And I think that's what you're getting at. If you're asking a question, it's because you need to listen. You want the answer, right? And you have to listen to the answer. And the next thought that came to my mind was, when you allow somebody to express themselves fully or give you the whole picture, and you ask questions so that essentially they're unloading. When they unload, think of the trunk of a car. When you've unloaded everything out of the car, you then have space to fill it back in. And so that's the same concept when you're having a discussion, especially with an individual that feels like they have a lot they need to say, whether they're coming in hot or they just have a lot of thoughts and a lot of energy. They first need the space to unload in order for them to then receive. And so I think that's what you were saying, that if you're able to host a space where you're able to allow the other individual, well, one, you're coming from curiosity, right? So you're listening for their answers. And two, you allow them to unload. They then become more curious into you and into the bigger picture of the background that you're coming from. And then the conversation actually shifts and changes, rather than like, no, this is my point, and no, you're wrong, this is my point. And then you get farther.
That never goes anywhere.
No, never. No. And two individuals get farther and farther and farther away from each other when they actually might have just started right next to each other, really, really close.
I think one line I just want to say from that is that I think you should not, undervalue the line of just saying, well, tell me more. Tell me more about that, or why do you think that? But again, in a certain tone. But I think tell me more, and I think I've heard you say that too sometimes. And I've thought in conversations that I've had with people that have gone sideways, I've replayed them in my mind and thought, if one of us had just said, well, tell me more about that, that conversation could have gone really well. Could have been fruitful, could have not gone sideways. Just that one simple line.
Yep. I know. Me too, girl.
Yeah.
Okay, Abby. So my listener, my Amigui listening in, they love to take tangible tools away from each podcast, each episode. So what do you actually say when a conversation starts to spiral? Do you have a tool, or do you have a suggestion that my Amigui can use in order to either shift the tone, shift the phrasing? Is there something that you could do to help things feel a little less tense or a little less spicy when it's already way too spicy?
Yeah. I think the tell me more line is definitely one thing that I would implement. Okay. Another thing is even just saying, like, can we have a pause? Having a little time out for yourself and the other person. Because anything you say when you're worked up and in that headspace isn't going to be good. So just saying, hey, can we just take a minute? I just need to take a lap around the room, take a breath. Or I think something that if I start to feel in my mind like, oh, they're sort of attacking me, and I start to feel defensive, then I'll do that mechanism of saying, okay, they're attacking this idea I've put out here. I'm safe, and they have a different experience. They grew up maybe in a different time or in a different household or whatever, and so they're coming at this from a different perspective. So they're not trying to attack me, so I just sort of talk myself down, talk myself through what's happening. And so if you can take a beat and go through those thoughts in your mind of, this is a person I respect, we have a difference of opinion, they're not trying to hurt me, and just mentally talking yourself through that has helped me in conversations.
So those 3 points were, number 1,
The tell me more line
was tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 was let me take a beat.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take
Mm-hmm.
a little second. We're getting defensive and
Mm-hmm.
vocalizing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 3 was coaching yourself through it.
Mm-hmm. And reminding yourself the idea is out here in the middle. I'm safe. Mm-hmm. We're having a spirited disagreement. But that's all that's happening. I'm safe. Whatever your affirmations are for yourself.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Abby. All right, Amiga, we've come into our curiosity hour.
Woo-hoo.
And on the pod, usually my family comes in and asks me, Zulean, ¿qué aprendiste? What did you learn this week? But today, you are my guest. So I get to flip this on you, Abby.
Woo, bring it on.
Amiga, what did you learn this week?
Ooh, what did I learn this week? Well, I work in a nonprofit and I work with people experiencing housing instability. And I have been working with some clients recently who are just trying to find a job, any job, especially jobs that maybe don't require a college degree or a certificate or any further schooling beyond high school. And maybe they themselves actually have an associate's degree or something like that. And so, but they're taking their associate's degree and they're going down to Walmart, Chick-fil-A, places like that where I think maybe myself and others tend to think, oh, they're always hiring, they always need people, and sort of this American narrative of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, somewhere's always hiring, blah, blah, blah. And I think that working with these clients, they've been trying so hard just to get any job possible, even if they have experience in management, marketing, communications, and they're going to Canes and saying like, please let me do whatever job is open. And they can't even get those jobs. And I think I had heard a lot about how tech jobs, people in tech were struggling, people in the legal field were struggling. There were different jobs in those fields that were struggling, but I wasn't really aware that like people in food service or general service or grocery were also really struggling. And so I think I've just really had this moment last week of realizing it really is just not that easy or that simple of just walking in somewhere and getting a job. Yeah. So that's something I was learning through my clients last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of, there are a lot of resources, but a lot of them have dried up. And so they may be trying to access all these resources, but the resource providers are overwhelmed or they've run out of their resources or their funding has been cut and so they don't have all the personnel. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that is something I've been learning.
Thank you for being transparent. Yeah, because from one standpoint, it's really easy to be like, just pull yourself up. Go get a job. There's always jobs that are hiring. And it's finding that even those jobs that we think are always hiring are not. Mm-hmm. And things are getting pretty tough out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So have some compassion on people when you might think, oh, if they would just try harder. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, or the case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for coming on today, Abby.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Yes. Bueno, amigui, that is the show for today. Si te gustó el podcast, if you like the episode, make sure to share it, rate it, and write a review. ¿Qué aprendiste? What did you take away from today? Como siempre, I'm your amiga Zulean, and I am sending you off with a huge abrazo, amigui. Nos vemos en la próxima.